The player you don't want to leave your draft without is that and more this week on the couch. Another wonderful, happy return of Davis Mattek. Automatic. Who's the automatic pick for you in drafts this year, Davis?
Tony Pollard. Tony Pollard is the automatic guy. I mean, I just say it. I say it like this, and I said it like this every time Ezekiel Elliott missed a game when Tony Pollard was the backup for DFS. You know, he'd be projected 50% ownership, 60% ownership, and really is as simple as this. When you get to Christmas morning, you don't wait to open your presents because you think you might be disappointed. You just open the presents, and if you end up being disappointed, sure, whatever. But I've been waiting for Tony Pollard to be the unquestioned lead running back behind this offensive line with this quarterback, with CeeDee Lamb for a long time. And I think of all the guys who are not named Christian McCaffrey, I actually think Tony Pollard, if you were to grant him the workload that his average draft position suggests, he's got to be the favorite to score the most points at the running back position. More than Eckler, more than Bijan, way more to me than Chubb, Jonathan Taylor, Derrick Henry, because a full workload for Tony Pollard would mean not only does he get the goal line carries he's never really gotten. I mean, even when Zeke was out, they were giving goal line carries to Malik Davis, and if he gets, let's call it 280 carries and 85 or so targets, and that honestly I think is even on the low end of what you would consider a full running back workload for a Dallas Cowboys running back, given how they've historically run the team, given how, even this coaching staff, right? Brian Schottenheimer, new offensive coordinator, loves to feed his running backs. There were, I believe, 529 available carries for Cowboys running backs last year. And I have not heard very many other people make this point, and I bet you will vibe with this. This is the first time since Tony Pollard has been in high school that he's gone into a football season knowing his body has to be prepared to be tackled 300 times. He was a bit player. He was a role player at Memphis.
Mm-hmm.
He was always a role player for Dallas. And something that the now departed and fired running back coach Skip Peete said about Pollard last year was they just didn't think his body could hold up to playing 80% of the snaps in a given game. And I bet this coaching staff is not going to say this because from what I've seen of Pollard, he looks pretty big. I bet he's closer to 215 right now than the 207 that he was at the combine. And I bet he's in great cardiovascular shape. And I bet he was doing some heavy squats and some big lifting this offseason because he knows he's about to get tackled a bunch.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that line up. And I guess suppose the only risk factor with Tony Pollard is just like you said, he's never done it before. He hasn't held up under 300 touches, 350 touches in a season, taking the pounding that NFL running backs do. But if you look at the philosophy of the team, like you said, the quality of the offensive line, and I don't know that we take a moment out to recognize, because we certainly take moments out to recognize when the Cowboys mess things up, right? Because, well, Jerry Jones. But they've done the transition of this offensive line from the line that Zeke was running behind to this line. And there are a few names, although I guess there's some Zach Martin. Give the man, he's an important part of Cowboys lore now. Give the man what he wants. And this is a good offensive line with a lot of new names and a lot of players that weren't necessarily expected to pan out as well as they have. But Brian Schottenheimer, Mike McCarthy, they're going to run the ball. Tony Pollard, hyper efficient. Even just they haven't brought anybody else in.
I mean, I actually think you hit on the point,
Yeah.
which is that Pollard is hyper efficient, and obviously his efficiency is going to decline a little bit, getting it. But the thing that Pollard is going to do, the thing that you have to do to finish as a top 5 running back is you've got to work in very efficient plays into the 3 yards in the cloud of dust. Like Christian McCaffrey is going to have plenty of runs where he gets 2 yards,
Right.
But 4 times a year, he creates space no one else in the game can create, and he scores on a play where he shouldn't have.
Right.
And if Tony Pollard is getting a bunch of carries in between the 20s, 5 to 10 of those are going to turn into 47-yard gains or 63-yard touchdowns that Malik Davis and Ronald Jones and, well, I don't know. I mean, I'm pretty high on Deuce Vaughn, but he is just going to have a couple. I actually compare him to kind of to Debo like that, where he is going to score. Tony Pollard is going to score fantasy points over expectation. You do the
Yes.
base rate
Right.
of you get a carry from the 37-yard line that's worth zero point 0.8 fantasy points, and a lot of the times it is. But sometimes when you're Tony Pollard, it's going to be worth 13 fantasy points because that's just how good he is.
Yeah, and the Cowboys, and you hate to see it. I've been using the term exploitative for the last couple of months. The running back market is just straight up exploitative. Now, for
Yes.
fantasy, that's not necessarily a bad thing. And this is where fantasy and our values and our ideologies can be in opposition to each other, because they have him on a franchise tag. And unlike some of the other players on a franchise tag, I think Tony Pollard, based on his prospects for earning when he entered the NFL, or even when he came out of
It's kind
Memphis,
of a small win for him, right?
yes, well, just to get that kind of sum, $10 million for 1 year, and then if he proves himself, there will be more earnings in the future. But he's not upset about it. He's not showing his
He
displeasure.
signed it right away. He was
Yeah.
the first guy to sign it.
Yes.
He didn't even think about it.
Yes, and he knows what the Cowboys are going to do. He knows they're going to squeeze every last drop out of him. But for fantasy, we like that, and the risk factor of he's never done it before is offset by the quality of the having no mileage on his tires, where he's set up to do it because he hasn't been absorbing that. Like Ezekiel Elliott, his former running mate, you see these running backs, the career arcs are changing. We used to be a 30-year-old drop off of a cliff. Now it seems like the NFL's not interested in running backs as much by the time they're 27 or 28. So all these things, when he's available in the second round, I think it's a slam dunk. And maybe even late first round by the time things settle out, especially with Jonathan Taylor. His status, his fantasy stock now is very unstable. So yeah, we got Tony Pollard, and I think you want to go into your draft at least with a few picks in pen, right? I think Tony Pollard in the second round absolutely is one of those picks. He's the kind of player that we have been taking in the first round for a long time. Let's
Oh, 5 years ago, 5 years ago, he would have been like the fourth pick.
right.
He really would have been.
Sure.
Yeah, he really would have been. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I think this is a good one. Let's talk about some more of your favorites. And we can get two in one team when we look at Seattle. And I want to ask you whether it's changed at all that Zach Charbonnet out indefinitely, well, a couple of days. Uh, Kenneth Walker has a groin, probably not serious, but
Yeah, classic Pete Carroll.
right, exactly.
The guy with the shoulder injury who's out indefinitely is back in a week, and the guy who they said it was just precautionary is still out.
Right,
Yeah, I
right.
mean, just classic Pete Carroll.
But on its face, and I agree with you, and Kenneth Walker is a name that stands out in so much as he has that mentality of, he wants, if you understand the kind of player Kenneth Walker is, you understand that giving him 12 carries is kind of wasting what he offers. You want him to get to 20 carries. You want that motor. You want that energy in the fourth quarter. You want that desire that he has when the ball's in his hands. And of course, it makes sense for them because of how important the running back position is in their offense to draft Charbonnet. I don't think that's an indictment of Kenneth Walker or their trust in Kenneth Walker. So maybe Davis, maybe this groin issue is what allows him to stay in the fifth round of drafts and make it easier to make him part of your draft plan. Why is he one of the guys you're targeting?
I mean, it's the home run stuff, and I'm also pretty high on Seattle's offense in general, like relative to the market. Sort of seems like what they're doing sort of the halfway thing. Like they can't be as good as they were last year, but we expect them to be a little bit worse. They play in a tough division, lots of good defenses and stuff, but I just think Seattle is going to score a lot of touchdowns, and they're also going to be very concentrated in the players who get the ball. You know, there's honestly, I think there's enough meat on the bone for Kenneth Walker to pretty easily be worth drafting him in the fourth round or fifth round,
Mm-hmm.
either, honestly, and enough meat on the bone for there to be like, well, Charbonnet could play on some passing
Mm-hmm.
downs. He could siphon off some goal line work. Maybe Kenneth Walker misses 3 games and Charbonnet goes ballistic
Yeah.
in those
Yeah.
games. Like I think there's plenty there. And I think they're just both good bets. Like I think Kenneth Walker without the presence of Charbonnet, I mean, I would probably take him over Brees Hall. That's kind of unpopular
Right.
these days. No one seems to be that worried about Brees Hall's knee. Honestly, maybe not
Except
even
the
the Jets
Jets.
are that worried. Well, you would think if they were really that worried about it, the Dalvin Cook deal would just be done
That's true.
already.
That's true.
So I just have a hard time interpreting that. But like when you're coming back from a knee injury that large, like I'll take Brees Hall in the fourth round, but I don't love taking him right at his cost in the third round. I
Mhm.
sort of prefer to take a wide receiver there, or Mark Andrews or whoever. And then the same thing I think is true of the wide receivers. Like both things can be true that Tyler Lockett is going to be undervalued by the market for like the fourth straight year, and Jackson Smith and Jigba can maybe start the season sort of slowly, but have an Amon-Ra St. Brown, sort of six
Mhm.
game stretch at the back half of the season that makes you go, it was smart to draft him and just hold him through while he's, learning
Right.
the NFL. Like I think both of those things can be true. And I actually think probably the most likely scenario is that the Metcalf drafters end up losing if
Yes.
this Jackson Smith and Jigba breakout happens, because it just like Metcalf is already not a huge target earner, and the Seattle Seahawks offense is more of a efficiency based offense than a volume based offense. Like I don't think they're going to throw 550 times, 600 times. That seems unlikely. And Metcalf is the most expensive one. Not that I don't draft DK Metcalf or that I think he's a bad pick, but Lockett in the sixth round when the board starts to get pretty thin anyway feels quite good.
Yeah.
And the board honestly starts to get thin where Walker is as well. And then
Sure.
the range where Charbonnet goes, I mean, there's just no one
It's
I
a
want to
gift.
pick.
He's a
Yeah,
gift.
he is a gift. It's like Juju Smith-Schuster or Zach Charbonnet.
Right.
I don't really have to think that hard about who I'm picking there.
Yeah, I will see if the ADP start to come up. I think Charbonnet, Devin Achane, Tank Bigsby, the word's getting out about Tank Bigsby now. These rookie running backs that aren't it's funny how the rookie wide receivers are the ones now that have that tax where Quentin Johnston, Jackson Smith and Jigba. Jackson Smith and Jigba's you look at let me drill down. I'm all over the place because there's so many things to talk about right now. Seattle wide receiver ADP is really strange. And I think one of the big picture things is having three wide receivers going in the top 75 of drafts means you should be thinking about Geno Smith. Now, quick aside about Geno Smith, and we all have to figure out our players to target and players to avoid in our draft plan, et cetera. But we also should be open to the counter case to the players that we really like or the offenses that we really like or what we're projecting or what we're predicting that informs what we're doing in our drafts. And Warren Sharp, and I think, if you don't know the name Warren Sharp, he's going to be on the couch in a couple of weeks. If you don't know the name Warren Sharp, you don't know his work. He just presents a lot of factual information, and you can do what you want with the factual information, but there's a lot of factual information there. His Seattle chapter was really interesting in so much that he pointed out that Geno Smith 2022 was actually worse than Russell Wilson 2021 by just about every metric except completion percentage, which I don't think a lot of people would guess that if you ask them to guess who was better, Geno Smith in 2022 or Russell Wilson in 2021. And that Geno had trouble against the blitz and projected to face a lot more defenses that are blitz heavy, and he faces more soft pass defenses. I bring all this up that if the offense is struggling and Geno is struggling in the first few weeks, see if it fits this narrative, and then we can circle back and try to figure out, well, how do we project Seattle's offense? But it should be a very good offense, like you said. And it's efficiency-based offense. They have these two young offensive tackles they drafted last year. They hit home runs at the tackle position. And you add Jackson Smith and Jigba, you're putting more stress on the defense. But you're absolutely right that Tyler Lockett's the guy that stands out. I still don't understand why, if Tyler Lockett outscored DK Metcalf last year, why is DK Metcalf going ahead of Tyler Lockett? If Jackson Smith and Jigba, we hope, is going to become Tyler Lockett 2 or 3 years down the line, why are their ADPs even close? Why are you drafting him even close to the guy that you say, well, hopefully things work out so he can become this guy, when you can just get this guy for basically the same cost? So I think you're absolutely right. Tyler Lockett somehow still no respect in the fantasy circles, but those are the players you want to target. The players that for some reason, Tyler Lockett should be the first Seattle Seahawks wide receiver off the board, or at the very least, he and DK Metcalf should be going in the same round. And Davis, I don't have a
Yeah, they should all be closer.
yeah.
They really should. I mean, Lockett is 4 straight years of 1,000 yards, 8.5, 9 touchdowns. There's a little bit of potential, age related decline. He was 11 yards per target in 2021. He was 8.8 yards per target last year. Geno did go on a stretch at the end of the season where his performance really went down. But I guess what's interesting about that is they were losing these games. The season was not going in their direction, and still every single game, at least one of Metcalf or Lockett was posting an appropriate fantasy
Yeah.
score for whatever
Yeah.
their weekly ranking was. Like Geno, 213 yards, 1 touchdown, 3 sacks, 2 picks in the last game against Baker Mayfield's Rams, and Lockett was 4 for 54 and one.
Right.
Like it just like because their target tree is so narrow, they're and another thing is Seattle does not rotate their wide receivers. A lot of NFL teams do this now, but Lockett and Metcalf's snap shares throughout the last couple years, with this coaching staff has been like 90%, 85%, 88%. Like they're not getting off the field for Marquise Goodwin
Right.
anymore, or
Right.
I guess Tariq Young or D. Eskridge or
Right.
whoever,
Right.
So that I don't know. I mean, maybe that bumps their target floor by like 1 per game. The fact that like every third down, every 2nd and 8, you don't have to check and see if Tyler Lockett's on the field. You just know he's out there in all passing situations. Like the Eagles rotate their guys. The Cowboys are I think going to rotate their guys this year. Like teams like to do that, but Seattle just doesn't have that luxury because they've been like the worst depth wide
Mhm.
receiver drafting team. Like every guy they've tried, Penny Hart, David Young, I think,
David Moore
uh,
was there for a
David
little
David
bit.
Moore,
Yeah.
David Moore, yeah. Um, just none of these guys have panned out. Not just they really have not at all. Um, and I mean I think Geno's going to be fine. I think the Seahawks are going to be like an 8-9 win team.
Mhm.
I think Geno will be fine. We talk about that baseline of competency to keep an offense on track, and
Yeah.
I totally think Geno is at or maybe even slightly above that baseline for competency.
Yeah, better than people had in their minds, in their database, their files of how good of a quarterback is he. I mean, he's above that line where he's one of the 32 best quarterbacks in the league, and we'll see what he does in year 2. But I think you're right that overall Seattle's offense presents buying opportunities. Staying at the quarterback position, I don't even want to lead this and be too leading, but we're going to talk about Anthony Richardson, and he's another one. It's hard. It's hard, Davis, because I can make a really good case for Lamar Jackson. I can make a really good case for Justin Fields. I think if there are scenarios for sure where we may look back in December and you'll say, who won your league? Well, who took Lamar Jackson? Who won your league? Well, who took Justin Fields? But I end up shying away from them at or near ADP because there's Anthony Richardson. And if you were waiting for the last sort of, the air traffic guy on the runway saying, okay, the runway's clear, takeoff is coming, he's getting all the first team snaps in camp. So any sense of, well, let's ease into this. Got Gardner Minshew. He knows Shane
I
Steichen
mean, they
doesn't.
said it. They said it the day they drafted
That's
him.
true.
This was not. This was not. They were not like, oh yeah, we brought Gardner in. We're gonna bring
Right.
him along
Right.
slowly. Like Shane Steichen took the podium and was like, I got my
This is
guy.
the
I
guy.
love this dude.
Yeah.
Like he was. There was no because you sort of get these situations a lot with quarterbacks where maybe the head coach and the front office and the ownership group are not in line. Like you sort of get the sense that
Right.
Mike Tomlin maybe wasn't crazy about Kenny Pickett,
Sure.
right? That he was like, sure, he's fine, but I'm sitting here in camp and Kenny Pickett and Mitch Trubisky are the same guy to me.
Right.
It doesn't
Right.
matter. Feels like what we have in Indianapolis is they're like, we're sick of the quarterback carousel that we've been on since Andrew Luck retired. I mean, the Matt Ryan, Phillip Rivers, Jacoby Brissett. Like they're just done with it. And to get off that carousel, you've got to make a big bet in one direction. You got to give a huge free agent contract to a guy. You've got to make a big trade, or you've got to do what the Colts did, which was draft a guy. And it doesn't make any sense. And obviously, the very easy narrative is Shane Steichen was the offensive coordinator for Jalen Hurts.
Right.
He saw Jalen Hurts really struggle in an offense that was not designed for him. I think a lot of people were very bamboozled by that playoff game in 2021 against the Buccaneers, where it just seemed like the Eagles couldn't punch their way out of a wet paper bag. And Jalen Hurts showed up the next year and probably should have won MVP had he not missed the last 3 games
Right.
of the season. Um, and Is Anthony Richardson as good as Jalen Hurts? Honestly, I don't think so. I mean, now there's some Oklahoma bias there
Mm,
with Jalen Hurts because I watched him in college, and Jalen Hurts is, I mean, this is to get into real cliche territory. Like that guy is just a winner. He's a worker. I mean, this is a guy who got benched in the national
right,
championship game
right.
and like took it on the chin. Was like that. That's my guy. Like no hard feelings. It'd be very easy to be a 20-year-old man benched in the biggest spot of your life, and basically to have that ruin you. And Jalen Hurts just kept working. I don't think Anthony Richardson. I mean, I guess I have less familiarity with him. My guess would be that Jalen Hurts is like a one of one,
Hmm.
and that trying to make Anthony Richardson and Jalen Hurts comparisons isn't really fair to either one of them because they sort of play in a different way as well. Like Richardson is
Sure.
actually faster.
Yes.
Richardson is much faster than Jalen Hurts. He's less of the bowling ball break through the linebacker. He's more Lamar style, Justin Fields style, where it's like get him in the open space and he runs like a slot wide receiver
Right.
or whatever
Right.
at 250 pounds. But also just from like a math perspective, it's
Exactly.
pretty simple to break down, which is there's no real reason to ask Anthony Richardson to play like a pocket passer.
Nope.
Like asking him to play like Philip Rivers would make no sense. The most effective way for the Colts to win games is going to be to use what Anthony Richardson can do.
Hmm.
And if Richardson can just, I mean, if he can be Taylor Heineke as a passer,
Right.
if he can be 59% completion percentage, honestly, even touchdowns equal to interceptions, like Baker Mayfield's rookie year, something like that,
Right.
and you get 11 rushing attempts per game or 8.5 rushing attempts per game. I mean, this is stats are way out there, but it's like every quarterback who has ran 75 times or more as a rookie has finished as a top 12 quarterback.
Exactly.
Um, so it's just really simple. And if you take the benching risk to zero and you just plug Anthony Richardson's baseline stuff into any projection model, like I don't have the football guys projecting stuff up right now, but I bet he's projected ahead of where he's going.
Yeah.
I
Right.
bet he's projected as like the quarterback 8 or the quarterback 7. And I just don't, I mean, you just take that guy.
Right.
Especially at quarterback in fantasy football, one quarterback leagues. I think the calculation changes a little bit in Superflex because you can't go get Kenny Pickett in Superflex. Like you can't get a starter, but like you can figure it out at quarterback if you whiff. If you just whiff at quarterback, you can figure it out in single quarterback leagues. And Richardson is the one guy going outside of the top four guys who what and I guess I'll include Fields in there.
Hmm.
Um, but I don't know. Fields and Richardson's projection kind of seems like the same thing to
Right.
me. Really, yeah.
That's the whole thing. Even if Richardson is, and I like how you just said math. Let's bring math into it because that's the thing. We can get into Richardson's game and the flaws, and it could be ugly, or the offensive line. You can bring in the warts in this Colts situation, but the most important thing is, like you said, Shane Steichen went out and got his guy, and we know that he's willing to make the quarterback a featured runner. And usually, when teams are a bit reluctant to make the quarterback a feature runner, it might be because of injury risk. But Anthony Richardson is in that more in that Cam Newton, Josh Allen, Daniel Jones. Let's not forget Daniel Jones mode where he's big enough that you're not worried about it. You're not worried about him absorbing a lot of punishment. And if you just look at the numbers in an objective way, like you said, he's going to rush more than 75 times. He's probably going to rush more than 125 times. He's going to be a terrible passer. Well, Justin Fields was a terrible passer last year. And from week 6 on, he was a top 5 fantasy quarterback. And like Justin Fields, like you said, once Richardson's in the open field, forget about it. I mean, he's going to have games where he's probably going to win your week for you on 2 or 3 scrambles. And in some ways, his green, fresh rookie approach to passing is going to help you in fantasy because he's going to be more likely to pull down the ball and run, which is for fantasy what you want. So it seems really simple. I wonder in some drafts, Davis, if I'm going to take Fields or take Lamar and still take Richardson and then trade Fields.
I mean, I do that. I do that a lot in best ball. I mean,
Oh,
obviously,
yeah.
the calculation there is a little bit different because you need to have multiple quarterbacks. But I don't even again, Richardson actually sort of like Charbonnet just goes in a range of drafts a lot where I'm just
It's
not that
easy.
really I'm not all that I'm just not all that enthused about the guys that go around him. Like, I don't know, do I need Brian Robinson?
Right?
Do I need Jacoby Myers? Do I need Michael Thomas or Cortland Sutton? Like, some teams maybe, but a lot of the teams, no, probably not. Like,
No.
I'm good. Like, just take Anthony Richardson because he's going to score a lot of fantasy
Right.
points.
Players that can change your destiny of your team this year. Anthony Richardson has to be on that list. It's going to be so fun to watch him. I was so happy when he went to the Colts. I just felt this warm glow of a good thing happened, that he ended up on a team with a coach that wanted him and understands what he is and understands the maybe one of the dirty secrets of the NFL, Davis, is it is just about, are you willing to design an offense for your quarterback? Are you willing to actually look at what your quarterback can
Totally.
do and what your quarterback can't do? I mean, look at Jared Goff, right? Can you just say, this is what this guy can do? Let's make an offense where we ask him to do those things. Geno Smith, right? Let's do that. And maybe some of the times that it goes awry, it's because, and then you get into confidence. I like how you brought up Jalen Hurts' story. Big mayor of Narrative Street, right? Belief in self. One of the things you knew that Jalen Hurts had coming into the league, and he had to do it again, because even though being a second round pick in the NFL is actually a lifetime accomplishment, oh my. If you were a second round pick in the NFL, I don't care the position, you did something that's a lifetime accomplishment. And that was considered a knock. That, well, no one really believes in him. And it's fair. I mean, if you fall to the second round as a quarterback, hey, Will Levis, if you fall to the second round as a quarterback, it means nobody in the NFL felt strong enough about your ability to be a franchise quarterback to take you where franchise quarterbacks usually go. So yeah, Jalen Hurts is awesome. Don't need to take him this year because you can take Fields or Lamar. Yeah.
Still to me unfair that Jalen Hurts did not win the Heisman Trophy his final season in
Yeah.
Oklahoma.
Yeah.
Joe Burrow won it. A little unfair,
Yeah,
I
Joe
think. I
Burrow
know,
had a historic. See, I'm down here in Louisiana, and I just have, Joe Burrow had
yeah,
a,
he's
it
great.
was the greatest quarterback season ever, really. I think he broke some of the numbers and in the SEC. So, but it's
He
okay.
did.
The
He
most
did.
important thing to keep in mind, Davis, I'm not when I start revisiting this stuff, is the gritty, which still to this day persists as the prevalent touchdown dance in the NFL, started here in New Orleans. Okay, the top two guys, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, in drafts, Southeast Louisiana. I'm here to take a stand and say, hey, Southeast Louisiana football scene, it's as good as South Florida. Those are the two places. So, sorry, Oklahoma. Although, Oklahoma, I start getting nostalgic when I think about the old Oklahoma-Nebraska games. That used to be the biggest game of the year. That was the biggest game of the
I
year.
know it's such the conference realignment has me feeling so numb about college football. Like Oklahoma not being in the Big 12 has really lessened, because that's not what I grew up with. That's not what I'm familiar with. Like the idea of Oklahoma, playing regular season games against like Florida, I'm just like whatever,
Yeah.
I don't care.
Yeah, just it doesn't resonate with the memories. But let's talk about a few other players maybe that are going to create some good memories in our fantasy drafts this year. Because again, this is the time you start out at the highest level of your fantasy draft, and it is about players that you don't want to leave without, or players like we're talking about Richardson. We're talking about players that you're willing to take. That's one of the easiest things about Richardson too, making part of your draft plan. You can just take him in like the 8th round, take him ahead of ADP. That's fine. If Richardson does what we expect him to do, he's going to be worth like a 4th or 5th round pick, maybe even higher. Now, polarizing players, but players that shouldn't be polarizing, at least when you look at cost. I love Davis to look at ADP last year and think about, well, what was the hive mind focused on? How do we come up with this player in this round and ADP this year? And I'm looking at Kyle Pitts and I'm thinking, why is he 3 rounds later this year than he was last year? And that again makes it easier to focus on him as a potential target. Why is he one of your potential targets?
I mean, there's a lot of reasons for it. The first is Kyle Pitts is just good. Like he just is. He is really as good as was promised. There's never been a moment in the NFL where you've looked at his route running or his ability to catch the ball. Like you don't get the feeling, you don't get the sense watching him that's like, oh, this guy he was really overhyped. And it turns out he's actually sort of that feeling you get watching Noah Fant, where you're like,
Sure.
Noah Fant, really good. Obviously, like to be an NFL tight end, you have to be good, but he was never as good. He never had moments in the NFL where you were like, oh yeah, I totally see what all the hype was about. Whereas with Pitts, I don't think that's true. He started. How many guys start their first NFL game? How
Right.
many 20-year-old tight ends have 119 yards and a touchdown against the Jets in their fifth ever NFL game? You know, and sort of actually view it similar to TJ Hawkinson, where everyone just got so sick of him that his locked in role, like last year, no one really wanted to draft TJ Hawkinson. I mean, he was going in the sixth, seventh round of tight end premium leagues. Like people just really, they were over it. And Kyle Pitts' situation was so bad last year.
Ca-
He led, he led the NFL in targets that were deemed uncatchable
Yeah.
by Pro Football Focus. The team just ran the ball all the time. By the time they start Ritter, they threw 20% more once Ritter
Yeah.
was the quarterback. And Kyle Pitts was, dealing with injury at that time. I mean, it's basically just like he didn't have any chance to benefit from that. He got hurt in week 12, and that was it. He was done. And so, it's like Drake London and Olamide Zaccheaus out there playing. Like Ritter maybe would have looked a little bit better with Pitts out there instead of Parker Hesse and Michael Pruitt. And people, they fixate so much on the touchdown stuff, like, oh, Pitts only has 3 NFL touchdowns. Like this guy's, he's never gonna make it. Like people just have Kyle Pitts fatigue. And
Hmm.
I don't really view, I guess, really what it comes down to is I don't view very much of his lack of statistical output as his fault.
Right.
Now, the Bears could say, the people who are not in on Kyle Pitts, they could say it's not going to be a good passing offense. Ritter has very little upside as a third round pick. Um, he's not like a great blocker, so they took him off the field quite a bit last year. There were multiple games where he played less than 70% of the snaps. Now the counter argument to that would be he still ran all the routes. I
Right.
mean, his route
When he's on the
participation
field,
was
he's a
still really
target.
good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, my case for it would basically be I still think he's really good. There's maybe a smidgen of upside in Ritter. The offense, I mean, it could get more efficient with Bijan in there, although they were such a good running team with, these total cast off Caleb Huntley,
Hmm.
converted linebacker Tyler Algier. Like maybe it just doesn't matter. And Arthur Smith is just a great, rushing play designer, kind of like Kyle Shanahan. But there were also just like stretches. I never will forget this. Mariota turns the ball over twice, and Arthur Smith just says, "Fuck you, dude.
Hmm.
We're literally running it
Sorry,
every
Joe.
play." And they ran it 15. Sorry, yeah, sorry, buddy. They ran it 15 straight times, 15 straight plays, and scored a touchdown. And that was just sort of Arthur Smith's like, I'm done with this guy moment. But if you were to look at all the tight ends who are not named Travis Kelce or Mark Andrews, honestly, I don't even think TJ Hawkinson can finish as the number one overall
No.
tight end. But Kyle Pitts totally could.
Hmm.
Kyle Pitts could see 130 targets. He could score 10 touchdowns. He's got that same sort of like efficiency thing where he hasn't shown it yet, but he could be hyper efficient just because he is that good. Like there's a lot of ways for Kyle and it's totally I love these type of picks where it's small loss, big win.
Right.
Kyle Pitts doesn't pan out in the sixth round, like whatever, fine. Most of your league mates are starting bad tight
Exactly.
ends who are not going to score. Like we all love George Kittle. How many games is George Kittle going to score less than like 8 PPR points? Like probably half of them, you know. And but Pitts could have a role where he never does that. If the Falcons decide that they want him to be the primary focus of the passing game, I think he can do it, and I think he would excel at it.
Yeah. I think that with Pitts, like you said, the cost that buying the ticket is a lot cheaper, and we should not underestimate how bad Marcus Mariota was. Two of the big stories I think in fantasy drafts when we look back at the 2023 season when it's over, Davis, like let's take a little time machine to like January of 2024 and say what ended up being really important stories to adopt in your draft or at the very least early on. And I want to say that to people because we're talking draft targets. Okay. We're talking who you're going to target in your draft, but that's not necessarily as important as we think, because if you're willing to adjust in that first month of the season, when we see the big reveal and we see the new reality and you are adjusting and not needing as much evidence as everyone else needs, and you make those trades, you make those waiver wire pickups, you make those commitments. In some ways, I always compare this, Davis, to how often is the guy who gives up the sack on the sack strip the guy who recovers the fumble, right? Because he knows, something bad's about to happen. So if you're really tuned in to Atlanta's not going to pass, their passing offense is not going to support anybody. Bijan Robinson, Tyler Algier are going to carry the ball 40 times a game, and Desmond Ritter is they're going to have him be a game manager. And then he goes out, and this is an efficient offense. And you mentioned Arthur Smith, and I think we need to put some respect on Arthur Smith's name. And I think the idea that this is going to be, and I've said this before on the show a few times this year, so people might be tired of hearing me say it, but he was putting an extreme run-heavy offense, as you put it so colorfully, because he knew that he didn't have a quarterback he could trust. He didn't have a quarterback to trust. It was just rational. He trusted the third-round rookie more than he trusted the starter when it came down to it. So what's going to happen with a full offseason where they trust him? They have a solid offensive line. They're going to have a running game. Still, the defenses have to prepare first and foremost for that. But you have top 10 talents now in Pitts and London. I think they could both hit. I think Ritter could hit. Not be a massive hit, but certainly in Superflex 2 quarterback leagues, he's someone you should be targeting. In Pitts, if he just gets competent quarterback play. I think the other one that's similar is the Baltimore Ravens and Greg Roman. And how much was Greg Roman holding back this offense?
Feels like he was holding them back a lot.
A lot.
Everything that I'm reading about Todd Monken is I'm like that guy knows what's up. Like he seems like he gets it. Doesn't feel. I think the big difference between the offensive coaching staff at Baltimore and Todd Monken is that the previous coaching staff really felt like they had to protect Lamar
Right.
and keep him from getting in spots where he might make mistakes. And it sounds like Todd Monken is willing to accept a little bit of the mistakes that Lamar is going to make, like because he's not the most accurate quarterback, but it's going to open up, it's going to open up a lot of room for Lamar to run. If they're doing all this, 4 wide receiver, 11 personnel, guys running all over the field type stuff, like Lamar's going to have, I think, a great success rate with scrambles. But also, I mean, the formula that worked so well for them in 2019 was just chucking the ball deep down the field,
Yes.
right? And just like let these guys, no one will ever forget Hollywood Brown's first game against the Dolphins. It's like, how do you even stop a guy who can run like Lamar can and he can just toss it on a rope 60 yards down the field? Like, how do you counter that? And it is overlooked, I guess, how bad some of his wide receiver play has been.
Yep.
I mean, like Demarcus Robinson and Chris Moore and Devin just like
Right.
total bit players, just like running all the routes. Like it's
Right.
so brutal.
Right. Getting significant snaps. So I think that changed, like you said, it's more of an aggressive mindset. When you have Lamar Jackson, why wouldn't you have an aggressive mindset? He got paid. He feels respected. So we're not worried. Was the durability issue just, and then we're going to see how this applies to Josh Jacobs and Saquon Barkley and Jonathan Taylor if he is with the Colts. How are you going to play through these minor injuries when your team isn't willing to commit to you and your future earning potential is at stake? But now that's not over this team. And I'll tell you, Zay Flowers is a guy that's on my must draft list at this point until he starts getting up
Yeah.
to. I think that Zay Flowers should easily, I'm going to say easily at this point, Davis, be the first rookie wide receiver off the board. I think he should be going around before Smith and Jigba or Johnston or Jordan Addison. And there's an argument for Jordan Addison, I think, to be number 2 in that group. If we're just looking at this year, if we're just looking at 2023, I'm not talking about dynasty. Zay Flowers should be like a 5th or 6th round pick at this point. Between the drumbeat, between Rashad Bateman, we'll see what he contribute this year. And Odell Beckham, it's great. I mean, I hope, I don't want anything to happen, knock on wood, to him in training camp. I don't want to bloom him. Just to get to see Odell Beckham playing football again, that's good. That's a good thing. That makes me happy. But I think that we could see right away that not only is Todd Monken going to improve this offense, but we weren't factoring in just how much. And like you said, the wide receiver play is important too, because you make that commitment to Odell Beckham money wise. You make that commitment to Zay Flowers in the first round of the draft. You're saying, we're going to address this. And then just keep in mind in the background, how's Ronnie Stanley? How's Morgan Moses? This offensive line hasn't necessarily been a strength, but if those guys can stay healthy, this could be fun, really fun for fantasy, and just make sure you get in some way. Maybe it's Mark Andrews. Sometimes I think it's tough. Tight end's kind of like quarterback, Davis, because I'm like, well, hey, if Travis Kelce's still there in the late first round, I'm thinking about it. But wow, Mark Andrews, should anybody be surprised if Mark Andrews, if he can stay healthy, again, knock on wood, not always a given with Mark Andrews, because he's, it's tight end. It's a rough position. Like 1,500 yards, 12, 13 touchdowns, 100 catches. That's totally attainable. It's attainable for him to be right there with Travis Kelce this year, but at a massive discount. The difference between the 5th pick overall and the 15th pick, that's tough. with Andrews or Pollard. I don't know which way to go, but then there's Pitts, and I think Waller belongs in the conversation too of the tight ends that could make your draft. Just needs to stay healthy. Waller and Andrews are two
Yeah,
of the
Waller I like too a
yeah,
lot.
and
I
it's
mean,
tough. I mean, maybe you just wait, and if you see Waller go off the board, then your next pickup, hope you can get Pitts. If you see Pitts go off the board, then your next pickup, hope you can take Waller. Because I think what we've heard with Waller, very simply, is that Daniel Jones knows I'm going to throw to that guy, and good things are going to happen. And I
yep.
think I think that we already know that that's how Lamar Jackson thinks of Mark Andrews. We already know that. So, and this is the good thing is it builds in flexibility. You know, you may have one build where you end up with Justin Fields and Kyle Pitts. You may have another build where you end up with Mark Andrews and Lamar Jackson stack. You may have another build where you end up with Anthony Richardson and Travis Kelce. And you just want to be able to be flexible, and you want to be able to roll with it when you're in your draft. And again, then after that, in the first month, be ready to adjust quickly to the new reality. We've been talking about players to target. I wonder, are there any players, Davis, that you avoid? Or players, another way to put it from a more emotional or reaction standpoint is every time you're in a draft and you see them go off the board, you want to thank the person that took them. Thank you. Because I wasn't going to take them anyway. It's just one more pick that allows someone else to slide to me. Who's on your avoid list?
I mean, everyone's got a cost, right? So like that's
Sure.
that's part of it. But there are definitely some guys I prefer not to take. Great example, Garrett Wilson. If I'm sitting there and I've got the 14th pick and the guy before me is going to take Garrett Wilson or Devontae Adams, I hope he takes Garrett Wilson every single time. That's a pretty good example of it. Saquon Barkley, I hope that I get Pollard there pretty much every. No, not that I like don't like Saquon Barkley or wouldn't take him or whatever, but I just really prefer to get Pollard there. T Higgins, I
Yes.
don't like being
I don't
forced to take
understand
T
his
Higgins.
ADP. I just don't get it.
Yeah,
It's almost like people weren't paying attention last year.
a guy I think I kind of like Ridley more than him.
Sure.
I would prefer to take Mark Andrews. I mean, I think there could even be an argument. Amari Cooper, that's the one where I'm like, I got to really be backed into a corner to take him because I like Ridley, Metcalf, and Debo more than him. And that the Amari's going to be fine.
Right.
But the weather situation for the Browns at the end of the year, I say this on every show I'm on,
Yeah.
but they're gonna end the year playing a bunch of games in freaking 20-degree weather in
Yes.
Ohio in
Yes.
that stadium built right next to a river or a lake.
Mhm.
And the way they built it means that it creates a wind funnel. We saw there were 3 games
Right.
last year where the total dropped over 5 points for the Browns. There was that Saints game where I think it got down to 30 points was the total
Mhm.
at close, maybe 31. And they were like, the Saints were like, we don't know if we're going to be able to freaking throw passes out here. It's so brutal. So that's definitely one. Najee Harris.
Mm.
No disrespect to the Pittsburgh Steelers, but Najee's been he's really struggled to be efficient. Now, Jalen Warren has looked efficient by comparison, but that happens a lot of the times in backfields where one guy sort of gets the pace and space plays and the other guy has to do the yeoman's work. So who knows how good Jalen Warren is? But what I do know is that there's the Clyde Edwards-Helaire corollary here, where the Chiefs just were sick of waiting for Clyde to be good, and so they just stopped playing him in year 3. They got to year 3, and they were
Mhm.
like, you know
Mhm.
what? The 7th round rookie and the 31-year-old with legs who barely work are outperforming you, and we're just going to play those guys because they're better than you.
Right.
And I'm worried that Najee's ADP does not properly capture that risk. Now, if Najee was going where Aaron Jones and Kenneth Walker went, I actually probably would take him because I would
Right.
say it's too far. Um, well, let's see. It's hard for me to. Not that I don't like Chris Godwin or Marquise Brown because I
Right. Right.
do in a
Right.
vacuum, but I prefer the Seattle guys by like a lot
Yeah.
to them.
I think there's when it's time to look at an Arizona guy or time to look at a Tampa guy, because we can talk about James Conner, we can talk about Rashad White, right? It's just, do you feel good investing in these offenses? Are these offenses really going to create overachievers? I don't see any scenario where that happens. I see many more. I think the Rams offense too. I see many more scenarios where it's more of a catastrophic failure. in terms of offensive production, and you wish you didn't take anybody. It's hard for me to come up with a scenario where, and again, it's easy to step back and look at that 30,000-foot view of the offense, and the environment is going to be a fertile environment for overachievers. One more player to target. You mentioned Kansas City. Everyone should know the name Deneric Prince. Speaking of Oklahoma college football, Tulsa, he's been one of the stories of camp. But as I always want to quote Alfredo Brown, our YouTube leader, saying, "Are we going to step on the rake again?" I like that visual, stepping on the rake with the Kansas City wide receivers. I It's tough, and could see. I was talking to Evan Silva, and he was talking about just doing more of a shotgun approach with because it's cheap. I mean, it's easy to get Kansas City wide
I love
receivers.
the shotgun approach with the Chiefs wide
But
receivers.
if there's one, I think you've got one. And why? Who would lead the pack if you say, well, if you could only take one, I'm only going to do one big draft. Who's the one that you would take out of the Kansas City receivers?
So if I could only do one based on what I expect them to cost, like I just did my first high stakes league. We just did a slow main event draft,
Nice.
and Rashi Rice is in best ball. It's a little bit different. He's a little bit more expensive because wide receivers are just so pushed up in this environment right now. But in these weekly managed,
Mm-hmm.
non-super flex tight end premium leagues or non-tight end premium over on the NFC. Um, these wide receivers, these Chiefs wide receivers are free. I mean, Sky
Yeah.
and Tony are top 100 picks now, but then take your pick out of Rice, Ross, James, they're free
Yep.
basically. And I think that Rashi Rice's ADP is an overreaction to two things. First being how spectacularly McCole Hardman failed
Yeah.
year after year after year, and how bad Sky Moore was. Sky was way worse than Hardman. However you want to revise that, like Sky was the worst punt returner in the NFL. He would get these freaking end arounds and just slip on the ground. I got so sick of watching Sky Moore play football last year as someone rooting for the Chiefs to win. It was really brutal to watch, especially after Hardman got hurt and they started dialing up the gadget plays for Sky Moore instead. Now, another thing is all the modeling for college football wide receiver prospects didn't really like Rashi Rice, and it sort of felt like the Chiefs were like, we just got to add a wide receiver to this room, and we're kind of on the bad end of the run. Like a lot of the guys maybe they liked already went.
Mm-hmm.
But Rice, I mean, one thing I could say for Rice is he handled a very high volume role at SMU. I mean, and I've been duped by these air raid college offenses plenty of times to know that that in and of itself is not always an answer. I mean, who can forget Jason Morrow like leading college football in receiving at Texas Tech and then just doing nothing at the NFL level. But if all I told you was the Kansas City Chiefs drafted a wide receiver in the second round and he's going at pick 145, you'd be like indiscriminately. You'd be like, I don't
I
need to
want to
know
know.
any
Yeah.
other information. I'm just taking that guy. Now, I think Rice is probably not going to start for the Chiefs at the beginning of the year. So he might become a little bit of a roster clogger. But I do wonder if the way the Chiefs played last year, and this is a crazy stat, my buddy Sam Sherman had this. The Chiefs, I mean, Mahomes led the NFL in passing, yards, touchdowns, and the Chiefs had three wide receiver games over 20 half point PPR points. Three the whole year.
Mm-hmm.
Two of them came in the same game, Juju and Hardman, and then Juju had another big game. Um, I don't know how sustainable that is over the long run with Travis Kelce being 34 years old. Like, I wonder if something that the best coach in the NFL, Andy Reid, might be thinking is we need to start planning ahead a little bit. We need to see what happens if we don't just let Kelce bail Pat out time after time. Like,
Right.
let's try and force a little bit more to these young wide receivers and see if there's anyone worth playing. And there's a role in this Chiefs offense. It was played by Justin Watson and Marquez Valdez-Scantling last year, which is and used to be Demarcus Robinson, which is basically just you are never getting targeted. You are doing cardiovascular work. You are clearing out space. You are getting down the field, and if you get targeted twice in a game, good for you.
Bonanza. Yeah.
And I don't, again, if they are going to try and I mean, Kelsey's 34 years old, like he could get hurt, he could just decline in efficiency a little bit. I don't know if you can have a guy out there with as much as the Chiefs pass who is just doing cardiovascular work, who's just doing
Mm-hmm.
wind sprints.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that a configuration that would make a lot of sense would be Rice, Moore, and Tony. And you kind of have these interchangeable guys. You don't know who the flanker is. You don't know who the slot is. You don't know who the X is. They're all moving around and swapping across the formation and doing jet sweeps. Like that is a really fast, dynamic grouping of wide receivers. But to start the year, to confirm Evan Silva's shotgun approach, I think Richie James is going to be like a
Yes.
50% snap share guy. He's going to be the team's punt returner, so I don't think there's any threat of him not making the team. And in a way, the Tony injury might be a little bit of a blessing
Mm-hmm.
for this coaching staff because they're going to get some time to evaluate Justin Ross playing NFL games. Seems like Ross is going to make the
Yes.
team. And I've been so out on Justin Ross this whole time. Like, this guy who hasn't been good since 2018. He's always hurt. Like, he can't get healthy. His freaking back is broken. But he's going to make the team. They're gonna put Tony on the designated for return IR for a month while he gets good to go. And who
Yep.
knows if we'll ever see the best of Kadarius Toney in the NFL? Feels like
We
maybe
might
we
have already
will.
seen it, Davis.
We might have already
It
seen
was
it in
against
the
the
game
Cowboys, wasn't it?
he got ejected. He
Yeah.
got ejected from his
It was his
breakout
whole
game.
career in one game. I like to say his whole career. It was distilled down to one game. And yeah, I
Absolutely.
think you make a good case for Rice and a good case for Kansas City's receivers in general. And hey, you want to be attached to Patrick Mahomes. And I want to, before we go off the rails here for the last few minutes, again, punctuation mark on what you said about Cleveland and the weather. 3 games in December in Cleveland, and I believe it was put out there early on in the Deshaun Watson derby that he didn't want to go to Cleveland because of the weather. And if you watch the way he played in Cleveland last year, late in the year, well, he was probably right. So that's an interesting point to bring up about, hey, that's when it matters the most in fantasy. So no to Amari Cooper on that grounds alone. And yeah, we're still fascinated with Elijah Moore. I'll talk about a fascination. See, Davis revealed this because you're probably my junior by at least 10 years. But when you were just learning to get up on a skateboard, probably is when I discovered the Grateful Dead. It sounds like you're discovering the Grateful Dead. All right, everybody, you can end the podcast right now if you don't care about the Grateful Dead. But for those of you that do, or aren't sure whether you do, it sounds like the last few months, beginning of a love affair with the Grateful Dead.
Yeah, so I saw Dead and Company here
Oh,
in St. Louis. And I like knew I knew what the Grateful Dead was. I'd heard, like I knew who Jerry Garcia was. Like I sort of got, or at least thought that I got the vibe. And my wife had gone to see Grateful Dead with one of her friends because her parents are old Deadheads.
yeah,
And she was like, I don't know if you're gonna like this. Like it's not, I don't know if that's necessarily what you're into. Cause I kind of like more, heavy guitars, and Nirvana's like my favorite band ever, and and
nice.
and Kurt Cobain hated the Grateful Dead, right?
Right,
He's like that's everything I'm against, and
right.
Led Zeppelin and stuff like that. But I went, John Mayer up there killing the
He
guitar,
was
but being
amazing.
totally sub the thing that I was so taken aback by was like John Mayer could have been anyone.
Right.
He was totally not John Mayer
No.
in that context. He was just a ripping guitar player, and I've always really loved blues and folk
Yep.
music. Like love Bob Dylan. Really like jazz too. And the Grateful Dead is just this melding
Hmm.
of like really exquisite 60s rock and roll, hardcore folk music, like, born out of the, Woody Guthrie in the
Hmm.
1940s and everything, and Robert Hunter, the great lyricist. So basically, I see this concert. I'm totally mind blown. I'm just captivated for the entirety of the 3 hour set. I'm like, during drums in space, I had no idea. I'm just like, what is going on? This is so wild, and basically had this experience where I'm like, wow, this is a great band. And so I start listening to the music, and then I read Dennis McNally's A Long Strange Trip,
Yep.
which is like this 700-page tome. And I'm listening to the Jerry Garcia band and
Yep.
like I am in it, and it's they're just phenomenal. It's really, and this is what everyone who really gets into them says, but they really are the great American band.
They
There's
are.
just
They are.
something so uniquely American about their sound and about the lyrics. Like which is funny because Robert Hunter was
Oh,
British, but you know, but yeah, they are really the greatest. And another great thing about this that you don't get with really any other band in existence is you never run out of stuff you've never heard.
yeah.
You could spend your whole life listening to the Grateful Dead, and you'd hear Dark Star played 100 different ways. So it's always something new and different.
Yeah, a wonderful tribute to the dead, and, they are like the Amazon River of American music, and if it's American music, then it's American culture and American history. It's all there. It's all in there, and, you know, I could tell there used to be a lot of great jokes, hilarious jokes from the Grateful Dead haters. And it's okay. If it's not for you, it's not for you, but like you said, it opens up this entire world, to all kinds of music, all the American music forms. I gotta mention, I saw Dead& Company, they came down for Jazz Fest, Davis. And during drums, Mickey Hart was doing an awesome job. I think this tour, since it is like the last Dead and Company tour, we'll see what comes next. He was curating different guests or different references during drums, and here he brought out the North Side Skull and Bones gang, which is I live in the Tremie, like they're around on Mardi Gras morning, like in my neighborhood, and the North Side Skull and Bones gang comes to your house on Mardi Gras morning and knocks on your door and reminds you that today could be your day. The Grim Reaper could tap you on the shoulder today. That's basically that's their thing, and they came out and did one of their chants. I'm getting chills just remembering it. That's one of the coolest things. Um, and Jerry Garcia, who's got the saddest, most evocative voice. The longing in the American soul comes through.
Yeah, he bums me out a little bit,
Well, if you watch the
honestly. Like
documentary series, he's
listening to Jerry Garcia is a little
sad.
bit of a bummer.
Well, he's got
Yeah.
the infinite sadness in him. He's got the sadness of the world. He's the vocalization of the sadness of the world. And it's a real thing, and it's indestructible, and it's always going to be there. And it's beautiful in its own way. But you should check out Legion of Mary if you haven't. Some of my favorite stuff is Legion of Mary, Jerry Garcia band. He pulls a lot of stuff from the New Orleans songbook, and yeah, like you said, with the Grateful Dead, you're going to explore forever. Like we were talking about before we went live. One of the big questions is, what's your favorite year? What's your favorite? Sometimes I'm in the mood for 77 Dead, but man, 72 Dead, that Europe 72 door. And every now and then you want to go back to Pigpen and the grimy, bluesy original.
Yeah, I really like Pigpen. My like and people don't really seem to talk much about Studio Dead
Uh huh.
anymore.
Uh huh.
Like that it's kind of passe. But like American Beauty and
Sure.
Working Man's Dead
Oh, that's
are
in the
like,
canon. That's in the
yeah, those are
canon.
those are
Those are
two of the
the
greatest
yeah.
albums
They're
ever.
in the
Yeah.
canon. I mean, they're put them in a time capsule. And there's a podcast. I want to use this last thing to talk about a podcast. I think it's called something like The History of Rock and Roll in 500 Songs. You aware of this show? Are you aware of this one?
No, but there's a Grateful Dead
Oh
podcast.
yeah.
It's called the Good Old Grateful Dead
Uh-huh.
Cast, and if you are like into it in an like intellectual sense, I mean, they are there's like an hour and a half Box of Rain podcast, and
Sure.
it's like which by the way is my favorite
That's
Grateful
the
Dead
last
song, which
song
I
they
think
ever
is,
played. That's the last
yeah,
song to Soldier Field. Such a long, long time to be gone and a
such a
short
short
time
time
to
to
be
be here.
there.
Oh, it gives me I think
Whoo!
about
It's
it and I
all a
just get
dream we
chills.
dreamed one after. It's a song that Phil sings.
Phil Lesh, right?
Yes.
Isn't that the craziest
Yeah.
thing about it? That the bass player, who is not a
Let
good
Phil
singer,
sing. No.
sings it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That unbroken chain. The last thing I'll end on, and I haven't even dived into this yet. I'm going to put it out there for everybody. So this podcast out there. It's like History of Rock and Roll in 500 Songs, and it's chronological. And he's up to the 60s now. It's this British guy who clearly just loves, loves, loves rock and roll. And Bill McKibben, who you may know from climate change writing, has been doing it for a long time. He wrote up this podcast and just wonderfully described what's so terrific about it, because it's one person who does an insane amount of research and kind of like our minds, Davis, connects everything up. All these disparate things all connect up just in a song. And each podcast is about a song. Well, he did a podcast about the Dark Star. Dark Star is one of the 500 songs. It's over 4 hours long, Davis.
Wow.
What a tribute to the song, right? That
A
he,
song, with one verse and
right,
like three like verses that they never sang, or they'd sing every once in a while. Have
right,
you seen the? I'm sure you have the 1983 one right after Bill Graham died,
uh-huh,
where Ken Kesey is doing beat
right,
poetry
right,
in the middle of it.
right.
Oh
It's amazing.
man.
It's amazing. I got to actually see the once I saw the Black Crows in Amsterdam, and John Sinclair came out with them. That's like MC5 and all kinds of other cool stuff. John Sinclair was actually a DJ on WWOZ for a while. This is where the real fun starts. But for you, the fun is going to start if you're still here. Well, then you don't hate the Grateful Dead, and hopefully you like what we brought you. The fun starts with your draft. The fun starts with the football season, which is officially underway. And the fun always for us is getting to serve you. It's a privilege. You're a wonderful audience, and it's a wonderful thing to get to do this. And we're back. Football season's back. Football's back. That means Davis Mattek's back on the couch. You're back listening with us. We always appreciate your company, folks, because you're so very classy.